Next, the Golden State Warriors. Important to disclose here, at the time of this recording, the Warriors have not yet resolved the Jonathan Kuminga saga. They only have 9 players on the roster at this point. We will obviously have an instant reaction video when that whatever happens there finally goes down, and it's possible they still pull off a trade. We'll see. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to proceed as though Jonathan Kuminga re-signs with the Warriors. It feels like the most likely outcome at this point. And as part of this, we're going to proceed as though the reported signings take place. So we're going to cover them in this segment as though Kuminga's a Warrior, Horford's a Warrior, DeAnthony Melton's a Warrior, Gary Payton's a Warrior, Steph Curry's a Warrior. That's what we're going to be proceeding with in this case. It is still possible that there's a trade, right? I went over last week that I think they should have taken the Malik Monk package. It would have cost the Warriors Jonathan Kuminga and Buddy Hield, but it would have brought back a really nice offensive guard in Malik Monk, who I think is much better than Buddy Hield. And he's like a rough approximation of what Jordan Poole was for this team in the title run. And you'd also get a future protected first-round pick that could help you make another trade down the line to bolster the team. And if you're concerned about losing Buddy Hield, not only is Malik Monk better than him, but if you're getting Seth Curry at a minimum contract, that basically replaces that bench shooting role anyway. But either way, it looks like that's unlikely to happen at this point. So the only guy they officially lost is Kevon Looney, who signed with New Orleans. Theoretically, they could fill out the back end of the roster with the same guys that they had last year, guys like Gary Payton or like Pat Spencer. But again, in reality, technically at this point, they only have 9 players under contract, so some of this is in flux. But assuming they retain Kuminga and they get the other guys I mentioned, the roster would more or less look like Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green, Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, Buddy Hield, Brandon Pajemski, Trace Jackson Davis, Guy Santos, Quentin Post, Al Horford, DeAnthony Melton, Seth Curry, and Gary Payton. That's a really good team. You have Steph Curry, who I still view as the 3rd best offensive player in the entire NBA, even at age 37. Last year when Steph was on the floor, if you remove garbage time, which is what cleaning the glass does, the Warriors logged a 120 offensive rating when Steph was on the floor. That was one of the single most impressive statistics I saw all of last season. That roster was utterly devoid of offensive talent, and Steph dragged them to a 120 offensive rating. I'm just a massive believer in Steph as an offensive engine. It's why I had him all the way up at 6 in my player rankings. His ability to consistently generate openings that even limited NBA players can capitalize on for points, and to drag these limited lineups to the scoring efficiency that he did, I just found it remarkable. Jimmy Butler doesn't completely solve their roster's limitations, but he does help in several key ways. He was a wonderful fit on the floor with Steph as a second side creator and as a connective playmaker. When Steph, Jimmy, and Draymond were on the floor together last year, in 950 possessions, they logged a 122 offensive rating, which is obviously an insane number. But he also helped with controlling the pace, with his ability to get to the foul line, and he also gave them a higher offensive ceiling when he was anchoring those units when Steph was off the floor. I still view Draymond as one of the best defensive anchors in the NBA. The Warriors were the top defense in the league post All-Star break last year. You're not doing that without Draymond. I think Horford is a dream fit with this team. I love the idea of him alongside Draymond and Jimmy in the front court as like a high IQ switching defensive scheme where the 3 of those dudes are just talking to each other and blowing plays up, getting in front of the action. I think those 3 could be insanely good together on that end. And then Horford provides a real offensive threat at the 5. He's a pick and pop big. He can hit above the break threes, which is key for the center position. And he also can drive closeouts and make drive and kick plays. He has a ton of drive and kick experience and read and react experience with Boston. And he can beat switches. If he gets a small on him, you can throw it to him in the post and he can hit a little left shoulder hook and just quickly turn that into points. The Warriors also have center depth with Quentin Post and Trace Jackson Davis, so they can manage Horford's minutes throughout the year, depending on how his body's feeling. I just love the fit, and I can't wait to watch him in Golden State. DeAnthony Melton is obviously a big health question mark, but he looked like a perfect fit in the system last year before getting hurt. So much so that it felt like it was a given that he would return to Golden State when he got healthy, and it looks like he probably will. Seth Curry and Buddy Hield provide real shooting off the bench. Brandon Pajemski and Moses Moody provide that youthful exuberance and athleticism on the perimeter. I think we could see both of them starting at various points during the season, depending on how often Steve Kerr decides to start Al Horford. I think Moses Moody will improve as a shooter after he had a rough end of the season on that end. I think he just knows that's his biggest point of emphasis. Brandon Pajemski had several huge breakout games towards the end of last year. He averaged 16 and 6 over the final 23 games of the regular season and shot 43% from three on 6 attempts per game over that stretch. He fell off in the postseason, but it does feel like Pods is like close to really settling in as a pro. And he's like the quintessential Steve Kerr player because he defends and he rebounds and he makes good read and react decisions in their offense. And like all of this doesn't even count Jonathan Kuminga, who I don't care how you feel about how he fits. He's just an option. He gives you optionality there. I prefer him on another team with an asset return for Golden State. But even in this context of this version of the team, he'll be able to help in some way, at least in some capacity, even if it's just depth during the regular season. And then Steve Kerr always seems to get a lot out of the back end of the roster because this team has such a strong basketball culture. They always look for the right kind of guys. Steve teaches them to play basketball the right way. Again, they clearly don't have the firepower of like Oklahoma City or Denver, but I view them as a solid second-tier contender. The potential upside lies in a potential trade down the line and with Steph Curry. If Steph can get back to that guy who can average 27 points per game for an entire playoff run, that's the type of guy with this group that I think could have some real championship potential. Steph had really big nights in the postseason last year, but he also had nights where he struggled to score. I think him getting back up to that high volume, like he showed towards the tail end of the season, is a key swing factor for the Warriors as well. Okay, we're going to go much quicker on these last two teams. First, the Sacramento Kings. They lost Markelle Fultz, Jake LaRavia, Trey Lyles, Jonas Valanciunas, and they added Drew Eubanks, Dario Saric, Dennis Schroeder, and their first-round pick, Nick Clifford, who projects to eventually be a two-way wing in the league. I do love Dennis Schroeder. I know he has a reputation of being like an international killer, and yes, he was awesome in Eurobasket, but I just think he's a really good NBA player. I think he's about as good an option for like a backup guard or like sixth starter as you can find in the league. He's a competitive MFer. He always plays hard on both ends of the floor, and he has real skills as a primary shot creator. Do I think the Kings should have given him $45 million or whatever they gave him? Probably not. But I am a big fan of him as a basketball player. The Kings are essentially a reboot of the Chicago Bulls from 2 years ago, but with a better center, meaning they're a team that has an already defined ceiling. And that showed again last year. To give you an idea, their last year in Chicago in 2024, we talked about this a lot on the show. They had a full season of really good health. If I remember correctly, DeRozan, Levine, and Vooch all averaged like 75 games played that year. So they were all basically together for the majority of the season. They had this massive sample size, and they had a negative net rating in the inferior Eastern Conference. So are you surprised that last year to end the year with Sacramento, that DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, and Domantas Sabonis in 1,121 possessions logged a negative 3.5 net rating, according to Cleaning the Glass? No, I'm not surprised by that. So in other words, this team is destined to battle for the 9th or 10th seed all season long. If you're a Kings fan, you're just clinging to the potential upside of guys like Devin Carter and Keegan Murray, and you should probably just starting to look to move guys like Keon Ellis and Malik Monk for picks because it's time to start looking towards the future.